for supporting the Fable and Folly Network. Here's another show we know you'll love.
Hello, hello, I'm Malik.
I'm Jamie.
And this is World Gone Wrong, where we discuss the unprecedented times we're living through.
Can your manager still schedule you for night shifts after that werewolf bit you?
My ex-boyfriend was replaced by an alien body snatcher, but I think I like him better now.
Who is this dude showing up in everyone's old pictures?
My friend says the sewer alligators are reading maps now.
When did the kudzu start making that humming sound?
We are just your normal millennial roommates processing our feelings about a chaotic world in front of some microphones.
World Gone Wrong, a new fiction podcast from Audacious Machine Creative, creators of Unwell, a Midwestern Gothic mystery. Learn more at audaciousmachinecreative.com.
Find World Gone Wrong in all the regular places you find podcasts.
I love you so much. I mean, you could, up the energy a little bit.
You could up the energy.
I actually don't take notes.
That was good.
I'm just kidding. You sounded great.
So did you.
This episode of Unwell is brought to you by The Amelia Project. Have you ever daydreamed about disappearing and starting over? What if there was a company that provided just that service? Welcome to the comedy fiction podcast, The Amelia Project, a show about a secret death-faking agency. In each episode, you'll hear a new client being interviewed and the dilemmas that bring them to the death-faking agency. They're in turn funny, thought-provoking, or downright surreal. It's just such a delightful premise. We think you'll really enjoy it. You can find The Amelia Project wherever you listen to podcasts, and stick around for a trailer for The Amelia Project at the end of this episode.
The Fable and Folly Network supports creators of exceptional audio stories, including the one you're listening to right now. If you love our shows, we want to hear from you. Complete our listener survey at fableandfolly.com/survey. This will help us learn more about you, what you like, what you'd like to hear more of, and how we can maintain an inclusive, safe atmosphere. As a thank you for your participation, we have extras and behind-the-scenes content from your favorite shows. Fans make the network what it is. Thanks for listening, and we can't wait to hear from you. Find our listener survey at fableandfolly.com/survey today.
Oh, hi.
We ready?
We're
doing this?
rolling.
Okay, great. Hello, Jeffrey.
Hello, Eleanor.
We're back. We're going to answer some more listener questions.
Let's do it.
Before we jump right in, I'm going to give the same spoiler alert as we did on our last one of these, which is, y'all, we're very excited to talk about the whole show now that it's over. So this is going to be a spoiler-filled conversation.
Yes.
To the point of, maybe sharing some stuff that we really only, just barely put in the show. So if you have not finished listening to season 5, stop now. Turn back. Pull a U-turn.
And also a shorter version of the thing we wandered around last time. None of this is prescriptive. If something we say, this is how we understood the show, and now that we've finished it, our perspective is equal to any other listener. So please feel free to let this certainly deeper your engagement with the show and the ideas. But if you've got some idea that contradicts,
that's cool. Whatever. Yeah. We don't mind.
This story is told in collaboration with you.
Yeah. All right. So first up, Jeffrey. This is really a question I would like to direct to you. Duo asks, okay, but where would you actually place Mount Absalom on the map of Ohio?
That's a really good question. So,
because I know you have a specific answer.
Yeah. We always said Southern Ohio. And that's for a number of reasons. I think a big part of it is that we wanted to get into the slightly more rolling hills, less just completely flatness. And also, if I'm remembering right, that's also where Ohio's primary celery crop is. We did not...
I don't think we knew that ahead of time.
Oh, no. Well, no, we definitely didn't know that ahead of time. But I do think that we picked celery before we picked Southern Ohio. As I remember. So
I think celery was just like a weird internal joke, and we got lucky that it happened to be a crop they grew in Ohio.
Oh, no, that was Jess Best's research. She looked up, or Jim, one of the two, looked up what crops. I am absolutely sure of this.
I think we're remembering the same story in the different directions.
That's fair.
Because what I remember is someone was like, this is a funny joke about Foley and old-timey radio, and then someone did the research and was like, guys, guess what? Just so happens we got lucky and it also grows in Ohio.
That's fascinating, and you know what?
Either one could be true.
Well, and hey, this is literally what a lot of Unwell is about.
Yep. Your memory is not a reliable narrator.
Fallibility of memory.
But Jeffrey, I also feel like you have often talked about how you went to college in Southern Ohio.
So I went to school in Central Ohio.
But like there have been moments where we've been like, how far away is Mount Absalom from Rochester, New York?
Yeah.
And the way we have answered that question is to put your college town in the Google Maps and gone, yeah, close enough.
Yeah.
So to be fair, I think that's also worth sharing.
Yeah. So certainly a lot of the cultural and such inspiration for me comes from Central Ohio. I lived in Knox County, both in kind of Gambier, and then spent a lot of time in Mount Vernon, both during and after school. And so a lot of the inspiration comes from that area.
Yeah. And in moments where it was like, somebody just drove from this place on the other side of the country. How far is that actually?
Yeah.
Or like,
yeah.
Spikes lives in Indianapolis. How far away is that? Yeah.
Well, and notably, I think, if you're triangulating Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, it is closer to Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I think that's where we put Spike's parents, and kind of wanted to be like, okay, that's the nearest big city where it is a trip.
Yeah.
But it's also like, it's a trip you can make before your parents realize you're gone on a bus,
right. Okay. I'm going to group together two questions that are sort of on the theme of like favorite characters and moments. But I'm going to read both of them because they're phrased a little differently. I think they're both interesting, and then we can just talk about stuff. So Ash asked, the characters on Unwell are so wonderfully complex, human, and lovable. Thank you. Listening to the show feels like spending time with good friends. Were there any specific moments in the show that really made you fall in love with your characters? And Vincent asked, was there a moment in the process that gave you goosebumps? The kind of creative shiver that's in awe of how great it was in that moment. This show has been such a big part of my life over the last 5-6 years. 5 years was on the air. We really developed it for a good year and a half before it came out. So it's like six
or seven.
7 years almost I've been working on it. And it's been such a huge part of my life. And also any human being, I have grown and changed a lot in 7 years. I have been to a lot of therapy. A lot of things have happened to me. I am a very different person now than I was 7 years ago. And there are just a myriad of moments in this show where somebody put something into the story that then when I heard it read out loud, or I heard it come together, as in production or in post-production, I would go, oh my God, that's me. And that was probably one of the most incredibly special things that's ever happened to me in my creative life, is having this process where I am growing and changing as a person, and I'm showing up in my process with all of these other people and all of these other creatives and talking about my life and this all happened, also the fucking pandemic happened.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of us were showing up and being like, oh my God, my whole life has been turned upside down, and bringing a lot of that into this process, and then having people write things or perform things and going, oh my God, you're telling my story back to me in a way that makes me feel understood, makes me understand myself differently. So to that end, I thought I would pull out like one moment that I think is particularly true of that, that's like in my brain from the 5th season, which is the episode where Marisol and Lily are trying to bail out the basement. And they get in this fight about like how they're going to handle the flooding basement. And then Chester shows up and they get on this whole other thing. And then they get to the end of that. And then like they haven't really finished having their fight and like all of that. And I remember listening to that episode, kind of coming back to like every single time I have come back to that episode, I have been like, this is an episode in which Lily learns a thing that when we started this show, I'm not sure that I knew yet. That like that lesson in that episode about like trusting people to do hard things with you. I'm like, that is a thing that it took me until I was this age to kind of like really be able to figure out and name. And that moment between Marisol and Lily just like it like breaks me open and puts me back together again at the same time. And it's really, yeah, I'm like having goosebumps just like talking about it. It's so, I love it so much.
Yeah. Oof. I think for me, so similarly to everything Eleanor just said, you know, it's been in a lot happens in 7 years, especially during a pandemic. And a lot of the last chunk of my life has been about learning to sit with and process and incorporate into my life death and grief and grieving. And there is a line in season 5, and I don't remember actually which writer wrote this, which is actually a way I want to underline how good this team was at kind of cross-pollinating and finding each other's strengths and building on each other. But David Reinstrom delivers this line as Colin Fenwood, and it's something like loss is as common as corn.
Oh yeah.
And this understanding that the thing that you are going through is the most tectonically terrifying, destabilizing, seismic event that has ever happened in your life, and also that just about every single human being will experience it or has experienced it, and that neither of those things take away from each other. You know, the idea that like, I think maybe this is a manifestation of American exceptionalism or something, but like, something can be incredibly important and life-altering, and also it can be something that every single person in the world has gone through.
Just like intrinsically human.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I certainly at different points in my life had this idea that like, if I'm feeling a big feeling about this, it means that no one has ever felt this way. Yeah. I mean, that's such a like teenage way of experiencing love, or, you know, any other intense emotion.
But also grief.
Yeah.
I mean,
which is a piece of love, turns out.
Yeah.
But no, that like, something doesn't have to be unique or exceptional in the way that like no one else has experienced this for it to be important.
But also that thing of like it also like is the worst thing. You are the only person to feel that feeling. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that also kind of gets to be true. Like that like my experience of grief is not a thing that anyone else will ever feel. And so like it is both things at the same time. And I think there's a lot of that inside of our story.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, that's a good line.
Yeah. Oh.
All right, Jeffrey, I put this one in here for you.
Okay.
Marissa asks, is there a moment in Unwell that made you cry the hardest? And I'm focusing this one on you because my answer was like, I cried all the fucking time. I don't think I can't isolate one specifically because like I'm a crybaby and I cried all the time. But
So, listener, I also cry all the time. I am a big crier. Basically every live show, like theater show I've been to, I've cried at some point. Gosh. Okay. So the moment, okay, two moments that, Clarissa, who played Lily, just broke my heart open and left it on the floor. In 411, when Rudy drowns and she screams Rudy, which I designed that episode and I had to listen to that a whole bunch. And that was it was a really interesting episode to design because there was a lot of really concrete stuff that we had to communicate through sound, about the flood and how the water was behaving and how big of a thing this was. And also the actors were doing such subtle, beautiful work that it was I really needed to stay out of their way.
Yeah.
And I knew that director Jeffrey would listen to this and go like, okay, too much noise. Like, I want to hear the actors. So that moment, and then Michael and Clarissa at the end of 511.
Ugh. How dare you?
When Wes appears and Lily chokes out Wes's name, and Wes says, I thought this was supposed to be a good thing. That whole conversation was so powerful. And that whole section of, I remember when in the writer's room, when we were searching around for like, what is the thing that allows the entity to disconnect and to like be okay here. And someone said, oh, is it just that they need to rest?
Yeah.
And in that moment, hearing like permission to rest, and then recording it, hearing Clarissa as Lily tell each of these ghosts that we had seen, to give them permission to rest, was just so deeply,
Yeah.
tears every time.
I also think that moment in part really hits me because, so Jeffrey, you and I work together very closely, and we've been through a lot over the last, however messy earlier evidence pandemic. And I feel like it's a thing that you and I have really reached for in our working relationship over the last few years as a touchstone of like, you are allowed to rest.
Yeah.
And it's a thing we kind of, I feel like, have said back and forth to each other a lot over the last couple of years. Like,
Yeah.
you are allowed to not be working sometimes. And sometimes that's the thing you need.
Yeah.
To be able to come back to work and be good at work. Like,
yeah. And this is like, we are both people who take our work, both art and the way the kind of business around art making, very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And there have been times over these years where we've had to say like, yes, you could burn for 6 more hours here, but instead, no, you need to rest and come back to this, and we will solve the problems later, or we will
carry it without you for a minute.
Yeah. And that's been a huge, certainly a huge learning for me.
Yeah.
And so to have it reflected in the art in that way was really powerful.
Yeah. All right. I got another one.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor asks, what was the significance of the witch's altar and the stories that Joey told about the Witch King?
Oh, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest answer is that they were true. So we part of how we built the history of Mount Absalom is that the entity has always been there. Mm-hmm. And that over the course of, this very long history of the land, there are recurring moments where something goes wrong. And when things go wrong, the entity finds itself either lashing out or grieving or, expressing in these ways that are more dangerous. And so in a much simpler way, I think this is a fun reveal to share. A lot of people have noticed that the year 1996 shows up a lot in the show. 1996 we established the last time this happened prior to our story starting.
Sure.
It is the year that Colin dies. No, not Colin. Grant. Uncle Grant.
Grant. Yeah.
1996 is the year that Uncle Grant dies and Dot comes to take over the boarding house. And so that is the last time that there was some big upheaval, and there's all these little clues that things were weird.
That was the last time there was a fire in Mount Absalom.
It's the year the squirrels infested the library.
That's
There's
right.
all kinds of weird shit that comes up. Anyway, but the stories that Joey is telling about the witch's altar are rooted in truth about a moment in time when Silas had entered the town and was killing people and scary things happened. And this sort of long tale of there are moments where the entity is not a benevolent force.
Yeah.
And that sometimes it can be really scary and dangerous.
Yeah, several of the ghosts the figments are more kind of concretely attached to certain emotions for us as we're creating. Wes to the entity's protective instinct, but Silas as the kind of honestly a different kind of protective instinct. This is the kind of trauma response of something has hurt me, or something is dangerous or scary, and so I'm going to lash out and destroy it. A kind of protective personality that is used to shield and hold trauma so that the entity doesn't have to.
Yeah. All right, so Ellie asks, my cat's getting into something. Okay, Ellie asks, did you have art or concrete descriptions of the characters for use amongst yourselves, or did everybody have a different mental picture of each character? So I think this is an interesting question because it also sort of gets into some of how we built these characters. So, but the simple answer is no.
Yeah.
We did not have an established, these are what these people look like amongst the writing team. I think, and I also felt like I wanted to answer this because I was like, man, I think the honest answer for me personally is that by the time we got, into season 2, they look like the actors in my head.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it's at some point it's well, Josh is just, that's who Rudy is, in the way that it makes sense to try to write to who this human is who's playing the role. I think you're going to be able to hear that little thump of the cat leaping and falling down on the floor. Yeah, and I think, so there are some, exceptions, but when it gets into the specifics, It's either in the text or they look like the actors in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly, the character that I feel like we end up describing the most is Silas.
Yeah.
And that is the character who looks the most different from the voice actor.
Yeah. He doesn't look anything like Silas IRL.
Yeah. But like Silas ends up getting a lot of physical description. Whereas, there are certainly hints to other characters, especially in how they dress.
Mm-hmm.
Less so.
Yeah. This brings me to my whole collection of questions about Rudy, Nora, and the observatory.
Okay.
There's a bunch of them. So, the first one is sort of coming at this from the side. Taylor asks, why do the different ghosts have different abilities? And does it have to do with their lives, or was it always a mental block, like the way that Nora is about leaving the observatory? Mm-hmm. So I think this relates back to something we talked about last time, about how the entity is building these ghosts or these figments to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. So there is something that is happening, and the entity is like, oh God, I need, how do I solve this? And they reach into their toolbox or their junk drawer or whatever, into their collection of memories and go like, what might be the solution? What do I have that might help solve this? So it's interesting because we in the writer's room always talked about the figments as each having a purpose or sort of like an assignment. Mm-hmm. But it's not, and it does have to do with their lives from before, because the idea is that the entity is pulling from some memory that makes them think that this might help with this situation.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah,
Tim shows up because Tim knows how to solve this problem.
Well, and notably, the entity can't invent anything out of whole cloth. It can only use the
things that have already been. And so they do. I mean, they have different skills and different kind of pieces of knowledge, but it is generally, in the way that the story was built, tied to what is the thing that we're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. Diana asks, was Rudy a ghost all along?
Good question. No. Rudy was a human who came here and then died and was brought back as a figment in the very end. But no, was a real live person.
All right, both Mac and Sarah asked really great questions about the telescope, Alpha Centauri, why the telescope tried to kill Rudy. Is the entity from space? Like, I feel like these are all sort of like circling around each other. So like, let's just talk about it.
Yeah.
What is going on with the observatory?
So we talk about the different wells in town. There is the well below the Fenwood House. There is the well below the town hall, and there is the well below the observatory. And the well below these were kind of each important places that had to do with something that the entity wanted to accomplish or do. And for me, Nora and the observatory were about the entity's desire to find something like it.
Yeah.
It was about its longing for community or to recognize something like itself.
And to understand its place in a larger universe.
Yeah.
And I think we talked in the writer's room about the connection between there being a chapel and sort of a part of history in which that desire, that reaching out, that looking for something like itself could be expressed through religion.
Yeah.
And then in another phase of history, that same sort of desire and emotional need being expressed through science.
Yeah. It being the tallest hill, a place where you can look at the stars, either aided by a telescope or not, and either tell stories about So many cultures have these really interesting stories based in constellations and stars and what these stars are, etc. And with the observatory, it was a signal being sent out to look for something like it.
Yeah.
To try to find something like it. And so Nora was that reaching out instinct to like, what am I? Who am I? What do I mean?
So why does the telescope try to kill Rudy? What's up with that?
So that is Rudy just literally kind of being in the way of the signal going out.
Yeah.
And it went to Alpha Centauri because it's the idea of like, oh, this is a close habitable place. So if I'm going to look for
if I am an alien.
Yeah, it's asking the question. Yeah, and it's not. I don't think it's solving the question. Yes, this is where the entity is from. But it is saying like, is this what I am? Is this where I'm from? And not getting an answer.
Yeah, and I think we talked about in that episode where Nora disappears in season 5 that part of it is anchored in just like a sadness and a grief of like, God, I thought this would help. And then it doesn't. Like the entity reaching out in this way and looking for an answer in this way and then not really getting back something that solves the problem for them.
Yeah. And, I think there's a really interesting thing in that, like, I feel like that was one of the more ambiguous pieces of our story. We wanted, that was on purpose. We wanted to be very careful about how explicitly we answered the question of what's going on with the observatory. And if you go and listen to it, it's all there. But
it's that thing we talked about earlier about like, we always wanted to make sure there was an internal logic that made sense, but also like, I don't know that it's enormously satisfying to explain that internal logic. I'm like realizing as I'm explaining it, I'm like, I don't know if that's actually more fun to know.
Yeah, I think that like, and this is part of why I think that like these answers should be taken as our interpretation, not necessarily as a gospel truth.
So to kind of put a cap on things, I have a couple of questions that are about future plans.
Oh, yeah.
So a couple of people asked, I'm just going to kind of group these all together. Will there ever be more Unwell?
Boy, that's a really interesting question. We certainly don't have any plans.
I think the answer is very likely no.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to leave anybody with like, oh my God, maybe it will. Like, I think the answer is almost certainly no, because we are not actively making plans for that. And I think it was, I don't know, it was important to me to have an ending. Yeah.
There is no version of this story that I would be interested in telling that is the next 10 years of the Unwell story. And like, do I think, there are various, things that I think would be really interesting to dive into. I would love to read a travel journal of Rudy, all of Rudy's trips, or, stories from older caretakers of the Fenwood House.
I'm a nerd and I want to read Abby's thesis.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, if we were to return to this world, it would be because we had a totally new story that for some reason made sense to tell with these tools.
Yeah.
And I don't know if necessarily these tools would set us up for a totally different story.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I don't feel like a driving need or desire
No, and I
to
think
do it. So
part of the joy of being able to produce Unwell in the way we did is that we were able to go into it saying, this is going to be a 5-season story.
yeah.
And you know, people have asked me so many times, are you sad that Unwell is over? Are you having a lot of, you know, big emotions? And yeah, I had a lot of big emotions.
So many big emotions.
but sad is not right, because, you know, am I sad that I don't get to spend studio time with this group of actors in the way that we have over the last years? Yeah, but we're gonna get to do new stories, and in the same way that, like, yeah, like, the years in undergrad were incredible years in my life.
I've been comparing it to a graduation.
Yeah.
That thing of like, it can be both a little bit sad and really exciting at the same time.
Yeah, but I don't want to go and try to redo that, because we did that already, and now we're going to do the next thing.
Well, a slightly different spin on this question is, will we be doing anything else together in the future? And I think the answer to that question is very much yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's worth saying that, like, a lot of, you know, several of the artists who were involved in Unwell were involved in Our Fair City. And as Our Fair City, our last show, was wrapping up, there was certainly new artists came in, some stayed, some left, new administrators and people. Like, there was certainly a changing of the guard. But you know, as that project wound down, this one spun up, and
the same thing is happening.
Yeah,
now.
as Unwell has been spinning down, we have been spinning up the next projects.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not going to share any specifics now, because we're going to hold those cards in our pocket for a little longer as we sort out what those projects want to be. But there are definitely new things coming afoot. There are schemes afoot.
Well, and let me say this. You will definitely be hearing more art from the team of Eleanor and I, and we are going to fight like hell to convince as many of the incredibly talented people who were part of Unwell as we can to, you know, cram into new projects. And also the people who are in Well, who wrote, who sound designed, who starred in Unwell, have incredible projects elsewhere in the audio fiction space, in the live theater space, in television, in movies. And so, like, there will also be lots more from them,
all over
separately
the place,
or together.
Yeah. You know, I was thinking about that thing you said just a minute ago about, like, the joy of being able to tell this story in this way and kind of, like, close it out in the way we wanted to. And I feel like I want to underline a thing that I'm really proud of and that I feel really grateful for, which is that, like, that is a product in large part of our being an independent production. You know, and I think this is, we've said this in other places and we've talked about this before, but it's such an important thing for me to say over and over and over again, because, like, we only really get to do this in this way because people are listening. Yeah. And love the story and care about it and support it. And the fact that we are able to make a show like Unwell, and we don't have to convince anyone, any great gatekeeper of the entertainment world, whatever that means, that it's worth making. Yeah. Really, really practically speaking, that is the reason why we were able to say, we're going to make 5 seasons of this show. We are committed to making 5 seasons of this show, and it will have a beginning, middle, and end in those 5 seasons. And it meant that we did not have to make season 1 wait for an audience to react to it, and then go to a funder and be like, no, really, you should let us make season 2. Like, we didn't have to do that. And I think I continue to feel just incredibly grateful that we can do that in this world today. That some of it is technological, but a lot of it is just about the community of support and listeners that we have gotten from this show, who are excited about it, who tell their friends about it, who occasionally show up with some money to throw at it. Like, all of those things are so important. And I think I hope that you listening to me talking about this right now know that, like, you are part of that and part of what makes this possible. And frankly, is the reason why Jeffrey and I can so, like, enthusiastically say, hell yes, there will be more shows, because we know that there are people out there who want to hear them, and that will be able to help us find the funds to make them.
Yeah.
And not that every single listener needs to throw money our way. You don't, like, not every, but just knowing that there is an audience out there really, really changes how I think about what we can do in the future.
Yeah. Well, and knowing that, there have been people who are listeners who came, all the way from the early days of Our Fair City and are still listening to Unwell now. And there are people who hopped on to Unwell last month and loved it so much that they have just listened to the whole thing and have caught up and are listening to this now.
Yeah.
And knowing that there are people who have listened to the entirety of Unwell once, twice, 15, 20 times through, and that when we make our next show, that you trust us enough to say, I really loved what you did with Unwell. I want to see what you do, having learned everything you learned making Unwell, and what you do with the next story. Because it won't be the same characters, but it's going to be a lot of the same people and the same artistic sensibility and the same commitment to telling a story that is important.
Yeah.
I also want to say that, like, I mean, kind of scaffolding on some of what Eleanor was talking about. I mean, we also produce audio fiction and audio art and other things in other non-independent environments, and have spent time pitching shows. And it's something I'm struck by, that, like, we talk about how different Unwell would be if it had to go through the pitching process. And
and don't get me wrong, like, all the things that I've made that are more commercial, I also love those shows. I have a lot of love for those projects, but they're very different.
It's very different, and it's very different to have, we are incredibly critical and thoughtful and precise, and so much gets edited out and developed, but the fact that the people who are doing that are all people who are actively, like, in the room and kind of inside the project, I think allows for a different kind of creation.
And there are things that we have done time and time again that I look at and go, oh, no one else would let us get away with that.
Yeah.
The big swings we take, big risks we take, that, a lot of them work. Occasionally, I think maybe they don't.
Yeah.
But like for the most part, we've gotten to do this really cool, wild piece of storytelling with some really crazy shit in it, like, and Sparkle Crinkles. Like, nobody else would have let us do that. Let's be real.
There are so many pieces of this story that, like, just wouldn't it wouldn't have made it. But because we knew that the audience would trust us, and look, there are also, I know there are people who are like, this is too much of a slow burn for me. I don't like, how these characters work, so I'm not going to go on.
Yeah.
And, like,
I'm just assuming those people haven't stayed this long in this conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not listening to this.
But when I think about this, like, professionally across the, space, I'm like, yes, also this show isn't for everyone. And and that can be okay too.
And like, if you're still listening, if you're listening to the second AMA episode at the end of 5 seasons, like, hey, guess what? You that I'm talking to in the headphones, you are exactly the person that we made this show for.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad it found you. And I hope if the next show we make is also for you, that you like it. And also if it's not, that's also fine.
Yeah.
And we hope it finds the people who it is for. So, thank you for coming on this journey with us.
I feel so lucky.
Yeah, because it's such a joy to be able to make art that isn't aiming for everyone, but it is, aiming for very specifically you. And you deserve it.
Jeffrey, I don't have any more questions, but I'm having trouble wrapping this up because I'm like, I just love sitting here talking to you about stuff. But I guess we don't always have to do that on mic.
Yeah, true. I think the way to wrap it up is just to say thank you again.
Yeah.
To each of you listening, because it has been such an enormous privilege to get to do this and to have people who support us and listen and fund it and yell about it on the internet, and the fact that we've gotten to spend the last 7 years of our life making this show is just
it
really
certainly
so
changed my
lucky.
life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Eleanor. And listeners,
we'll see you next time.
We'll see you soon. Bye.
The Fable and Folly Network, where fiction producers flourish.
Congratulations. You've reached the Amelia Project. A new life awaits. If you're not serious about this, hang up. If you continue, there's no way back. Leave your message after the beep.
Enter the offices of the Amelia Project and be ready for surprises, twists and turns. Follow the Amelia team as they help their clients fake their deaths and come back with new identities. Each episode is different. Each client coming to the death-faking agency has a unique story to tell. If death and disappearances, comedy and crime, mystery and magic sounds like your cup of cocoa, The Amelia Project is the podcast for you. Search for The Amelia Project wherever you find your podcasts. And remember, leave your message after the beep.